A few years ago I had jury duty and I began to think about laws. We have a lot of laws in our country, and there are things that our laws can and cannot do. Our laws can help maintain order or punish wrongdoers. But there are also things that our laws cannot do. They can't change hearts or prevent all crime. It's important for us to know what laws are intended to do and what they're not intended to do. God has laws for us. 4,000 years ago, God handed down to Moses the 10 Commandments and then a host of other laws. And it's very important for us to know what these laws can and cannot do, because we can get into big trouble if we use God's laws the wrong way. For example, God's law was never intended to impart life. Galatians 3:21 says that it was never intended to be a way that people would be right with God. So why do we have the law? The law was intended to illuminate our need. Galatians 3:24 says that the law was our guardian or our tutor until Christ could come. So in a sense, it's like we needed laws as young people to be a babysitter for us until Jesus Christ could come and change that. Now here's the problem that many people have. God has always intended that we would obey Him. And imagine for a moment that our obedience is like a train track. We're going down this train track, and what's pulling us is this engine of grace. And the way that we hook ourselves up, we couple ourselves to this engine, is by faith. So we've obeyed God by faith through the context of grace. Now here's the problem that what's happened to us. Many people don't like this method. They want to have a little more ownership, a little more control, a little more say in our own destiny. And so what people have done is they've taken these train tracks and they've turned them upright and leaned them against the door of heaven and turned them into a ladder, thinking that they could obey God enough to get to Him. Now here's why this use of the law is so dangerous. God says that everyone who tries to get to Him through obedience, through keeping the law, is under a curse. And the reason is very simple. If you fail one rung, you're cursed. You're toast. Along this track, you could miss some from time to time, but there was still grace and still faith. But under this track, if we're trying to get to God through obedience, if we miss one rung, the Bible says we are completely under a curse. Here's the good news, though. Christ came to redeem us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. Jesus was the only one who could perfectly obey God, and He stood in our place and redeemed us from this. Now here's the implication for you and me. The moment we believed, we were freed from the obligation to the law. We no longer are under the law as our authority and as our obligation. We're freed from that. Now we still have a relationship with the law. I like to use the 10 Commandments in my life as a witnessing tool to help people see just how futile it is to try to climb to God by being good enough. Or I like to use the 10 Commandments in my own life as a worship tool to think about the character of God and who He is and who He wants me to be. But I'm no longer under this obligation. So the question is, how do I live my life? If I'm not living my life by a set of rules to try to get to God, how do I live? The Bible's very clear. Romans chapter 7 actually tells us we're no longer under the code of the law. We're under the leading of the Spirit. We're people who are led by the Spirit. We still obey God in the context of grace and through the act of faith, but we do it by the power of the Spirit. So how do I know if I'm walking by the Spirit or not? Galatians 5 says it's very obvious. People who are walking by the flesh, it's very obvious. People who are walking by the Spirit, it's very obvious. But here's the shift that I want you to make, and it's the most powerful shift I've ever made in my mind, and it's this. People who are driven by laws assume every day that they're down here, and their goal is every day, I'm not walking by the Spirit. I guess I have to really work hard to get there. But Galatians 5:24 says we're already walking by the Spirit. So here's my question. What would change in your life if you began every day assuming that you were walking by the Spirit, unless God pointed out to you with clear evidence that you weren't? How would that change knowing every day that you didn't start at the bottom of the ladder, having to climb your way up to God, but that you were already right with God, already walking in the Spirit? He was already pleased with you, unless you had clear evidence to the contrary. Great men and women of God, we have been freed from the obligation of the law to walk in a new way of life, the way of the Spirit.